The recording button should now be red. Thank you for nodding, Jessica. I appreciate that. So I'll just do the briefest of reintroductions. Hello, everyone. This is the Emerald Ash Borer Awareness Week webinar series for 2025, fourth webinar of the week. And I am now going to officially hand this over to our speaker of the day, Jessica Raspitha. I am going to turn off my slides, and then Jessica, if you can please bring up yours and take it away from here. So I'm stopped sharing, and you should be able to bring yours up.
Okay, how does it look?
That looks great.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so hi everyone. My name is Jessica Raspitha. I'm the Land Resources Program Manager for the St. Regis Mohawk Tribe's Environment Division. And for geographic context, the St. Regis Mohawk Tribe and the territory of Akwesasne are located in northern New York, straddling the US-Canadian border at the St. Lawrence River. So I wanted to begin by thanking the event organizers for asking me to speak as part of the EAB Awareness Week webinar series, and for all the work that they do to draw attention to the impacts of the emerald ash borer. And today I want to offer another perspective to EAB mitigation, one that views ash trees as a cultural resource in addition to being an ecological resource. And
sometimes you need to just like click on the slide and then there you go.
Okay. So to provide some background, the Land Resources Program is one of 6 environmental programs under the St. Regis Mohawk Tribe's Environment Division. Our program is fairly new. It just formed in 2019. And the intent was to create a cohesive team to oversee our various land-based restoration efforts, which includes forestry, invasive terrestrial species, oversight of our pesticides program and the tribal pesticides permitting process, and the operation of a native plant nursery. And central to the mission of our program is to acknowledge that nearly all of our cultural practices are tied to our natural resources. And for those practices to continue, those resources need to be both available and safe to use. Okay, so to establish a baseline understanding of cultural resource use, I want to acknowledge that Indigenous knowledge, traditional ecological knowledge, and Indigenous traditional ecological knowledge are all academic terms that are essentially used interchangeably to describe the knowledge that comes from having a long-standing relationship with the environment. And it can include things like when to harvest certain plants, how to locate different species, or how to use them. And so it's important to acknowledge that there's many different uses and practices, and that there's no single knowledge holder within a community. So to help guide some of our work, we formed a native plants working group, which is pictured in the bottom picture here in one of our early working group meetings back in 2022. And the intent was to bring together different knowledge holders to talk about just the state of native plants within Akwesasne, what they were looking for specifically, what they were having a hard time finding, and just the different trends that they were seeing with the resources that they use. And so this group is made up of medicine people, horticulturalists, foragers, basket makers, artisans, seed savers, and really anybody who has an interest in our local native plant communities. And so I'm sure you can tell there's a lot of different species that we monitor, that we work to enhance. And it's what makes our most frequently asked questions so difficult to answer. So we're very often asked which species are culturally significant to you. And the shortest and simplest answer that we can give is all of them. And we refer back to the Haudenosaunee Thanksgiving address, which it's intended to open and close all of our meetings, just to lay the groundwork for productive gatherings, and to establish that we're all here with a good mind and a common purpose, and to acknowledge all of the elements of creation that make our existence possible. So we begin by giving thanks to each other, to thank our Mother Earth, the water, the wildlife, the trees, the plants, and the air that sustains us. And acknowledging that we're all interconnected and that we don't own the environment, we're part of it. And so as I mentioned, there's many different cultural uses, and I wanted to touch upon some of them with the disclaimer that, as mentioned, we're one of 6 environmental programs. And when we refer to cultural use, we're essentially exclusive to the use of plants and trees as per the purview of our program. And so just to touch upon some of those cultural uses, in the left picture, I have some of the plants and the teas produced by Snipe Plant Botanicals. And they're a small local business owned and operated by a Mohawk medicine woman, Satyayoga Bucktooth. And on her shelves, you can see the plants that she's foraged and dried before turning them into various tea blends and tinctures and salves. And in the top right corner, we have a picture. It's an example of a traditional meal that was cooked using only locally grown, foraged, or hunted ingredients. And then um, on the bottom right, I have a picture of traditional lacrosse sticks that are made of hickory. But for so there are for the purpose of today, I wanted to focus on traditional Mohawk basketry and the resources that we use for this practice. So in Akwesasne, we primarily make two types of baskets, utility baskets and fancy baskets. And it's worth noting that basketry is not specific to the Mohawks. There's many tribes in the Great Lakes region and the eastern United States that have very similar but distinct practices. Um, and so pictured here on the bottom and on the right, we have some examples of fancy baskets, and you can see the incorporation of other native plants into these. Specifically, these are all made out of black ash splint as well as sweetgrass. And then in our top left picture, I wanted to draw attention to a member of our team, Angelo Johnson, who, in addition to being our lead field technician, he's also a sixth generation basket maker. He specializes in various utility baskets. And I just wanted to mention that having him on our team and having him in the field assisting with all of our management decisions is how we ensure that we're applying an appropriate cultural context into our work. So all of our baskets are made primarily out of black ash splint, which is incredibly unfortunate given everything that we all know about the emerald ash borer and the outlook of the ash tree. But splint is obtained by peeling back the bark of an ash tree, specifically black ash, and pounding the log in a way that separates out those annual growth rings, as you can see in our bottom left picture. And you can also see from that picture the cross section of the tree. We're specifically looking at the sapwood, which is the more pliable part of the tree. And in the cross section, you can see that distinction with the sapwood being the outer rings and the core wood being the center rings. And I do have a video that I'm going to attempt to play. Okay, so I included the video demonstration because making splint is a very skillful and labor-intensive art. And so in our video, we have Louis Gray. He's a well-known Mohawk basket maker. And while he makes this look very easy, I can assure you that it's not. And the traditional ecological knowledge that's tied to this practice is passed down through generations. And it's not just this technique that's taught, but it's how you identify a basket tree, because not every black ash can become a basket. And it's when do you harvest that tree? How do you turn it into splint? How do you clean the splint? How do you store it? And then how do you make the different types of baskets? Okay, and before we move on specifically to EAB impacts, I wanted to touch on the function of some of these baskets and how they're related to our other cultural practices. So the Haudenosaunee people, which represents the 6 tribes in current-day New York State, were known for the cultivation of corns, beans, and squash. And to this day, the St. Regis Mohawk Tribe's Agriculture Department remained one of the largest producers of Haudenosaunee white corn. And so white corn is a large part of our traditional diet, but it's not quite like the corn that you would find at a grocery store or even a farmer's market, in that the ears are much larger, the individual kernels are larger, and the corn has to be washed before it can be consumed. And by corn washing, we're referring specifically to the hard outer hull on each individual kernel that needs to be removed. And so they're removed using a cooking process that's shown on the left, on the right. But each of those individual hulls still needs to be manually removed. And the fastest way to do that is using a black ash corn washing basket that has a particular weave that is really effective at getting those individual hulls off much faster than peeling each kernel individually. And to this day, our agriculture program still use black ash corn washing baskets when they harvest their white corn and when they prepare it either for sale or to be ground into different flours. And so I wanted to mention this function because when we talk about the implication of EAB and what the loss of ash will mean for basketry, the impacts are further reaching than just the basketries and the baskets themselves, because these baskets have function in other cultural practices and in ceremony. So I'm sure many of you are aware of the emerald ash borer, but just in case you're not, EAB was first found in the United States in Michigan in 2002. And it has since been found to have a nearly 100% mortality rate on affected ash trees. And in New York, these include black, green, and white ash. And we first detected EAB in Akwesasne in 2016, and we're currently in the early stages of a mass die-off event. So it's important to understand the specific way that the EAB impacts and eventually kills its host tree. So as part of the EAB life cycle, the beetle will lay its eggs in the bark of a tree, of an ash tree, and the resulting larva will bore into the vascular tissues of that tree. And unlike other wood-borne beetles, the EAB makes these very trademark characteristic S-shaped galleries as it meanders back and forth through that vascular tissue. And as it does that, it ultimately impacts the tree's ability to transport water and nutrients from the roots up through the tree and through its canopy. And eventually, when there's enough damage under the bark, it is enough to kill the tree. And so to show what this damage looks like, on the top left, we have a picture of what is a fairly new gallery. You can kind of see the larvae is still in that gallery. And we know that this one's new because the bark surrounding that gallery is still very bright. It still retained a lot of moisture. Whereas when we look at the picture on the right, that one is showing some older galleries, where not only did we know a woodpecker had essentially gotten the larvae because we marked the woodpecker damage, but you can see that this gallery is older and that the tree has scarred around those what are essentially wounds to the tree in order to preserve itself. So you can see from the discoloration that all of this scarring is what is actually killing the tree and its tissue. And the reason this is so devastating to our basket making community and for ash as a raw basket material is that the EAB is directly impacting the exact same part of the tree that we need for splint. And you can imagine the sheer disappointment when a basket maker is to harvest what they believe is a basket quality tree, not knowing the signs of an EAB infestation, only to peel back the bark and find completely unusable material underneath. And so while the picture on the right shows this fairly extensive damage, this particular tree was selected because it was showing outward signs of an EAB infestation. It had the woodpecker damage, it had a sparse canopy, and there were epicormic shoots. But some of the trees that are experiencing an earlier infestation that may not have all those trademark symptoms and signs, the splint was still impacted because when a tree is fighting off an EAB infestation, it's not putting the same amount of energy into its growth. And so if we were to take a slightly impacted tree and try to produce splint from that, the growth rings are much thinner. As you can see in the bottom picture, we have splint that was produced from a healthy tree in the right side and splint that was produced by an impacted tree on the left side. And so yeah, this is why maintaining the health of these trees is also important just for the raw materials before we even get to the die-off stage. And so in response to the arrival of the emerald ash borer in Akwesasne and the anticipated impacts to ash as a cultural resource, the Akwesasne Mohawk Territory Emerald Ash Borer Community Response Plan was created in partnership between the St. Regis Mohawk Tribe and the Akwesasne Task Force for the Environment. And this was meant to outline our community goals as well as our response options. And predating this document and forming the basis for our response was the EAB. Our response to EAB was the Handbook for Black Ash Preservation, Reforestation, and Regeneration. This document was prepared in 2000, prior to the arrival of EAB in the United States, and it served as a compilation of field experience working with black ash to ensure that this vital cultural resource would continue to be available so that the practical knowledge of seed sourcing and propagating ash would be preserved so that we could continue to meet these goals. And I do want to highlight that one of the authors of the Black Ash Handbook, Les Benedict, he is the assistant director to the St. Regis Mohawk Tribes Environment Division. And his leadership and involvement in Black ash preservation throughout the course of his career really has formed the basis for our response efforts. And it's his work, as well as the work of so many of our partner agencies, that's allowed us to respond to this threat as proactively as we have been able to. So from this initial response plan, which again was written prior to the arrival of EAB and Akwesasne, we've since implemented and fine-tuned a number of these response actions that we continue to take annually. I'm going to go through each of these fairly quickly, but I would be happy to answer any questions anyone may have if you'd like to put them into the Q&A section. So first off, each year we're involved in monitoring for EAB in partnership with USDA, and this is to monitor both the movement and trends and population growth of EAB throughout our territory as part of an early detection network. And so we've been part of this network since 2006, well before we began finding EAB. But we continue to do it each year as a means of tracking population growth, even though we know that the EAB is now found almost in all pockets of our territory. But through this monitoring is how we are able to follow that. We're still seeing continuing population growth, leading us to believe that we have not yet reached our peak EAB infestation. Okay, so we also treat a select number of trees using an injected pesticide, and that provides up to 3 years of EAB resistance. So in order to be considered for an injection, the tree needs to be in good health in order to uptake the pesticide, since the goal is for the injected pesticide to travel up through the tree. So that way, if an EAB is to lay eggs on that tree, the resulting larvae isn't able to bore into the tree itself. But this can be a lengthy process. We first have to find these trees, identify which ones are going to be prioritized, go through the injection process. So it can be both time prohibitive and it's also cost prohibitive in that the required equipment and then the actual product can be kind of expensive. We are using an ArborJet system and a project called Triage, which is an amamectin benzoate product. And so since each injection provides up to 3 years of protection, all of our treated trees also need to be revisited on a 3-year cycle to ensure that we are maintaining our level of protection. And so because of these reasons, we need to be really selective. And what we're looking for when we prioritize trees is whether or not it's occupying an ideal black ash habitat, whether or not it's a seed-bearing tree, and whether or not it has those basket grade qualities that we think will eventually make a good basket tree, because those are the genetics we want to preserve when we're going through our seed collection efforts. And so in our pictures, you can see on our bottom left, those are the resulting injection locations. So it does cause relatively minor damage to the tree, and they do heal fairly quickly within a couple of months. And then the picture on the right, it's a little hard to see, but it's a side by side of the tree on the left has been treated, and the tree on the right that has no canopy, that would making it very hard to see, is untreated. And even though we think that these trees are roughly the same age, the impacted tree isn't nearly as tall as the other one that is continuing to grow year after year. And so far, we have seen that the product is working, and the injected trees are successfully resisting an EAB infestation. So we also work with USDA and the biocontrol lab to release parasitoid wasps into black ash stands that have known EAB populations. And this is an attempt to foster populations that will predate on EAB eggs and larvae. So we're working specifically with 3 different species of parasitoid wasps, each that target the emerald ash borer at different stages of its life cycle. And so we typically release wasps on 3 different sites throughout the summer, and sites, again, which are selected based on known EAB populations. And the goal of this effort is to have these species successfully reproduce independently on these sites, so that they could eventually apply some population pressure to EAB, which is currently growing unchecked. And so as part of this effort, we conduct annual checks each year where we remove a number of trees from each of these release sites, peel back the bark and looking for EAB larvae, checking for signs of parasitism. And thus far, one of our sites we have found evidence of 2 of these species successfully repopulating and reproducing on the site. And that does offer us a lot of optimism that there may be a future in where we have ash that are able to persist in a landscape where with EAB being managed by a natural predator. So we're also involved in applying silvicultural prescriptions to remove older growth and open up the tree canopy that would eventually improve black ash habitat regeneration. And in parallel with that effort, we also we selectively harvest basket grade trees so that they can be processed into splint before the tree is impacted by EAB. This is to preserve its cultural and economic value. And it's also done because if we are able to process these trees into splint, we can keep the splint for a very long time. We know that it'll store up to 40 years and still be used. So one of that is one of our efforts is the preservation of the cultural resource is taking the healthy trees while they're still available, process them into splint while we still can. And much of this work is being done in nearby state forests in partnership with the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation. And this is largely because there's a lot of remote pockets of ash in the state forest that haven't been as heavily impacted as some of our other sites that are closer to roadways and waterways. And as you can see through several of these photos, this work is largely done in the winter. And we do this when the ground is frozen specifically to minimize ground disturbances. And so this part of our mitigation work is largely weather dependent. So when we have particularly mild winters like we did in 2024, our season can be cut short. And as a result of all the selective harvesting that we've done, we're able to offer community log pounding events as a means of processing these trees into splint, and also as a means of sharing the knowledge involved in the log pounding process. And these events occur on every Thursday during the month of May. So our team is actually hosting one of these events as we speak. And these events are important to us, not only for the outreach it provides with our basket making community and having that platform for knowledge transfer, but it also is helpful for us in communicating with some of our project partners and explaining that cultural component to our work. So like many of you, we have agency partners that are supportive of the work and innately aware of the ecological threat of EAB, but hosting them at these workshops allows us to demonstrate the cultural practice and the cultural value that the ash tree holds for us, just to deepen their understanding of the species and its significance to us. And so photographed, we have some of our partners from the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation, the U.S. Department of Agriculture, the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, and the Akwesasne Task Force on the Environment. So our annual seed collection efforts have also largely been guided by one of our partners and our work with the Mid-Atlantic Regional Seed Bank. And they've helped us with understanding the requirements for maintaining genetic diversity to support nursery operations. So for each species that we want to collect seeds from, we are ideally targeting up to 50 individual seed sources per species. And this requires a lot of field reconnaissance work to identify all of those seed source locations and multiple visits to get our timing right because ash doesn't seed every year. And there's also we want to incorporate our cultural consideration to make sure that we're also focusing those seed collection efforts on trees that display those basket grade qualities. And each year we're planting more non-ash trees to replace some of the lost canopy when our ash does succumb to EAB damage. Part of this effort includes hazard tree removal as the trees die and become a threat to infrastructure and public safety. So much of our replanting work is done in conjunction with our native plant nursery and that native plants working group, just so that we're able to identify the species that the community would like to see in our landscape. And these restoration efforts, we plan to continue with our hazard tree removal, with the replanting effort, and propagating those replacement trees through our native plant nursery. And while we haven't started propagating ash, we are closely monitoring the EAB situation and preparing for when we are at a point in time where we want to start propagating ash for eventual replacement in the landscape. And I want to once again acknowledge the support that we receive from all of our local and federal partners that make all of our efforts possible, both through funding and technical assistance. We're always very appreciative to our many colleagues, many of you included, that have dedicated your careers to bettering our understanding of EAB and the management options that are available. And for our team at the SRMT Environment Division, EAB mitigation and the day-to-day activities required to carry out this work, it's so much more to us than just a job. We feel the obligation and the responsibility to our community and to the continuation of our culture to do everything that we can to preserve these trees and being able to share our perspective on seeing ash as a vital cultural resource with those of you who are also working to mitigate EAB damage is really important to us. So in closing, if there's anyone who wishes to be more intentional in preserving cultural value of resources, I urge you to work with the tribal liaisons within your agencies so that you can begin forming those co-beneficial relationships within your regions as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Jessica. That was great. And we have a really wonderful amount of time to do Q&A. We can leave your slide up for now in case anybody has questions about other slides. Oh, perfect. Thank you for putting your contact information up. That's awesome. So hopefully you can all see my smiling face now. And I'm wondering if anybody has questions, the easiest thing to do is to type it in to the Q&A, and I will read them out loud, and then Jessica will answer them, hopefully. So there you go. If anybody has questions. We don't have anything queued up right now. So actually, I have a question for you, which is, Jessica, normally, would you be down at the log pounding day today? That was so exciting to hear that it's actually today, and generally speaking in May.
Yeah, I normally try to be there. It is one of our most successful outreach events we do throughout the year. It normally draws a crowd, and it is really useful just to have the one-on-one interactions with the people that stop by. We get a lot of basket makers that come because they're interested in the work. We have some that come to show us how it's done, which is always fun. And then I don't know if you were able to get the audio from the video that I shared as well, but there's a very distinct sound and rhythm that comes with the log pounding. So we also get a lot of elders that they come just to listen.
Oh, that's
Um,
awesome.
and they talk about remembering when they were kids or when they were younger and hearing their parents and their grandparents again because we're a river-based community with the way that the sound travels over the water early in the mornings. People remember hearing that very rhythmic sound, and it is a very distinct sound. And it's really heartwarming to hear that they're like, I don't hear this as much, and they like coming just so they can just to hear, just to listen.
Yeah, that sounds amazing. Um, well, I'm glad you guys have such an amazing attendance at those events. It sounds like if I was in the area, I would definitely swing on by to experience that. It'd be great. Um, and let's see. You mentioned at the end that if folks are interested in doing similar work in their areas, that reaching out to tribal liaisons is useful. And I'm just curious, do you primarily have those relationships with state tribal liaisons, or is that normally a federal relationship? Or is it both?
Um, it's both.
Okay.
So there's 574 federally recognized tribes within the United States, and there's just the distinction between the different communities and what's important to them. It's impossible to we can't speak on behalf of another nation.
Yes.
So when you're working in a region and you're working with natural resources, those resources may be very important to a nation that's within your region that you may not be aware of if you don't have those relationships.
Okay. Excellent. Yeah, great. Oh, good. We got Q&A popping up. All right. We have first question from Mia White is, how long do the utility baskets usually last? I guess under typical use.
So they can last a very, very long time. A lot of people consider them family heirlooms that they've had in their families for generations. Um, I know that at our agricultural program, some of the baskets that they use have been in their families for at least 3 generations. That's how long that they last. They're also, I get that they look like they wouldn't be as strong as they are, but I remember when my dad was making baskets and he was still learning, and the basket maker who was teaching him said, if you can't do a handstand on the rim of that basket, it is not, you haven't done it right. You have to do it again.
Wow. All right. So the
But
so
they're
strength
very
testing.
strong.
Yeah, yeah. That's awesome. All right. Great. Um, John Irwin asks, do you know of any black ash log pounding events taking place in Vermont?
I don't know of any in Vermont in particular, but we do a lot in Maine with the Wabanaki Nations.
Cool.
And our it all of our log pounding practices they differ a little bit. So it's always fun when we get together and we can show each other our different practices. But I
Okay.
don't know of any particularly in Vermont.
Okay. Yeah. So that would be
Sorry.
a reach out to the Vermont folks and work from there kind of question. Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome. Great. And another question from John. Um, do the corn washing baskets have a special design?
I think it's about the weave particular. So rather than getting all of the splints tightly woven, you want them to be a little rougher on the inside of that basket. And it really is just to get that mechanical removal of those hulls off the corn.
Awesome. So definitely a special weave. That's great. Okay. Let's see. I can dismiss these questions. So we answered them. Um, well, I'll give it another few minutes in case something comes to mind for folks. But just wanted to reiterate thanks so much for participating. Um, for everybody listening in, just keep in mind that we will be posting this recording. So if you really thought that one of your colleagues or a volunteer or a friend would benefit from this webinar, just take a look probably next week at the Don't Move Firewood website, and we will be able to have that recording up for you to share. And while I gave that little spiel, we got 2 more questions, which is great. All right. From Jeff Merrill, do you have a standard of how many trees in a stand to treat with insecticide? And are the injections mainly to preserve basket trees or to attempt to slow the spread of emerald ash borer?
Okay, so we don't have a set standard. Um, it's more of a prioritization of how many trees are in the stand that we meet our prioritization standards. And again, those are based on their location, their quality, their whether or not they're a seed bearing tree, and the like. And sorry, what was the second part of the question?
Are the injections targeted mostly to preserve basket trees or differently to attempt to slow the spread of emerald ash borer?
So we really have 2 main objectives. One of them is to preserve the basket trees we want to retain the seed bearing we want to retain the seed bearing ability of those trees, so that way we have seeds for future restoration goals when we reach a point in time where we can do that. And the other is habitat preservation. So
Okay.
black ash occupies a very specific habitat, one that is very wet in the spring and then very dry in the summer. And there are not any other trees in our landscape that can do that. So our concern is that if all of the ash were to be removed from a landscape, those areas that they were once occupying would become more wetland type habitats, and we wouldn't be able to put trees back. So a large part of that effort in identifying trees that are growing in ideal black ash habitats are because we are also trying to preserve that habitat for that future restoration effort.
Okay. Yeah, that's great. Um, all right. Uh, Next up, back to basketry. How long can black ash logs be stored and still be good for pounding?
So we think we can get them to Um, we think we can store them for a while, but ideally you want to be processing them within 6 months.
Okay.
And it really has to do with the moisture. When the tree starts to dry out, Sometimes the splint cracks. It's not as easy to process them. So our normal timeline is we harvest in January, February. We do all our log pounding in May, just to keep it within that 6 month window. Because one of the concerns is we don't want them to get moldy, which is one of the reasons it's much better to store the materials as splint than logs. The logs are also a lot bulkier. But we think that if we were to store them under the right conditions, we would be able to submerge the log and to bring viability back to them later. But we haven't fully fleshed that out yet.
Okay.
But the short answer is within 6 months,
So
ideally.
that's a pretty close window. I mean, it's, you said that the splints can be very good for up to 40 years, but I guess what's interesting to me is that in order to get the splints out of the log or make the log into the splints, you have to move pretty quickly.
Yeah. And so it's 40 years, not four.
Oh no,
So we
maybe I said four. I meant 40. I meant
Oh,
40.
okay. Yeah. So we've known people that like when they've had like a grandparent pass and they've discovered amongst their items was splint that was processed 40 years ago, and they've still been able to successfully use that in baskets.
That's great, actually. I mean, that's great for that cultural component that you said, is that you'll be able to prepare. So yeah, awesome. Okay. Our next question is from Kunyu Zhang. And how are the results of your injections going, and are you collecting data?
So we collect data in terms of location, date, and time of application, and we do revisit them annually just to see how it's going. But we're not doing any sort of qualitative data on there. There's a lot of trees that we're doing. I think roughly about 120 per year are on this cycle, and but so far the trees that are injected are persisting. We're not seeing the die back on those treated trees that we're seeing in the other trees that are in the same area.
Okay. Well, that's a good start for sure. I'm going to read the next question, but I'm going to rephrase it a little bit as well. Also from Kunyu Zhang. Um, for your tribe, how are people feeling about the ash protection program? What are people's reactions? What are people's hopes? I think that the question's a little more general, but I would love to hear just from your experience.
Is there a specific component of the ash protection program
The
that
question
you're
is
referring to?
general, but I think it's a good one too. Are people really getting a lot of hope from it? Is there any, is it helping people with their sense of loss? Just kind of a general question.
Um, I think in general, when we talk to basket makers, that I think there's still a great deal of not disbelief, but that they don't realize the scale that an ash die-off can have here, specifically because we're still in the early stages. We have some trees that are dead, we have some that are dying, but we still have some that are healthy. So the people that are actively looking for those healthy trees are still finding them, and I think that perspective will change very quickly when they become harder and harder to find.
Yeah, so the hard reality is still sinking in, it sounds like to me.
I think so because and to the people that understand what is happening and they are seeing it happening and at the speed that it's occurring, it is really hard to accept, especially you when you work with someone like Angelo, who's a sixth generation basket maker. It's so integral to his being and who he is as a person that it's a devastating loss to think that we might not have this resource available for when it's time for him to teach his kids.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really hard. Yeah, thank you for sharing. We have a question from Treya Coldman, and that is, where can I find out the spread of emerald ash borer across the United States? Has it made its way to Washington State? Um, and then they say they know it's in Oregon, and that has already been answered. But I'm reading it out loud because you can't see the answers or the questions on the recording. Katie Kosanki put in the USDA APHIS interactive emerald ash borer infestation map, which is exactly where I would have sent people. We'll put that in the I can make sure that's included on the recordings information on our webpage so people can refer to it. And then Matt Mills from Oregon piped up that not only is it in Oregon, but it's also in Vancouver, BC, emerald ash borer. but it is not, but I will add, it is not yet known to be in Washington State or California, which would be the areas near there. However, unfortunately, I will say that when it was found in Oregon originally, it was one spot, and then very quickly other locations were found. And it does not appear that that is necessarily because that one place spread, but rather that multiple locations were found very quickly after the first one was identified. So quick bit of information there. Thanks for your patience, Jessica. I'm going to close that one. And then I'll ask, I think what will make our last question, because it's a good one, from Jeff Merrill. Have you seen any evidence of lingering ash, i.e. a tree that survives despite other nearby ash dying off from emerald ash borer, so it shows some resistance? And Jeff adds, I've heard of this in other parts of the country. And so, Jessica, I'd love to hear what your experience is in your area.
So we're aware of the criteria for lingering ash, and we hope that like we're in the forest enough to know that when we have lingering ash, we will find them. Because a lingering ash is defined as a tree that has retained 95% of its canopy cover 2 years after 95% of all of the other trees have died.
Okay,
So we're
great.
just not at the stage in our infestation where we would be able to find that yet because we don't meet the criteria just yet.
Great. And I will add, as a separate part of my work, I work a lot with the lingering ash identification groups. And generally speaking, lingering ash are being found, as Jessica just outlined, with that particular set of protocols and standards in other parts of New York. People are actively looking for them and likely to find them in Massachusetts and Connecticut in areas with that level of mortality, like Jessica just said. But it also does depend a great deal on the type of ash tree. And in the comments, this is mentioned. Katie Kosanke says, Fraxinus manchurica, which is Manchurian ash found in Asia, shows quite a bit of tolerance, which does make sense because that's where emerald ash borer is originally from. We also know that white ash and green ash, which is not the same as black ash, which is what Jessica was presenting on, we are finding lingering ash in those species when groups look enough. When you look enough and it's a landscape that's ready for the identification of lingering ash, they can be found. So there is a lot of really strong research, identification, and getting communities ready looking for lingering ash, even if not yet in the St. Regis Mohawk tribal area has there been identification of lingering ash, broadly speaking. Jessica, I'm really glad to hear that you guys are waiting for the right moment to start looking for a lingering ash in all of your areas. So thank you for doing that.
Yeah, it'll definitely become part of our management actions when the time is right.
Exactly. Yeah, you can't do it beforehand. It doesn't work. So with that hopeful note of getting ready and being prepared to find surviving ash once the landscape is at that stage, I think we're going to wrap up our webinar. So thanks again so much, Jessica, for being with us. We will put this recording online, and if anybody else has follow-up questions, please email either Jessica at the email here or myself at the Nature Conservancy. My email is lgreenwood, like my name, at tnc.org. Thank you, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, everyone.